So as the Columbia protests have heated up, where people have actually occupied a building and barricaded themselves inside, I saw this clip from Krystal and Sagar, and I felt like Krystal gave some of the worst advice I've ever heard. Really, really bad advice. So let's check this out.
All right, let's get into it.
Let's go ahead and get to some of what is unfolding around the country. Some extraordinary scenes. We want to start at Columbia University, which really has been kind of ground zero for these protests and for the crackdown on these protests. So we can put these images up on the screen. You're talking about the echoes of 1968. So here we have protesters taking over Hamilton Hall on campus. That was one of the same buildings that 1968 anti-Vietnam War protesters took over at that time.
So this is the building that they broke into, and then they essentially like put locks on the doors and they put chairs up to try to barricade themselves. And they said that they weren't going to leave until the university gives into their various demands about divesting from Israel and all that other stuff.
Right. And it's a very historical building. People took advantage of or took over this building because they were fighting against the Vietnam War, a war that they may have to go and fight and die in.
Yeah, it's a lot of people have been making these comparisons, and it's to me does not seem to be applicable because, as you just laid out completely, it's very different when kids are literally protesting against themselves have to sent over to Vietnam to possibly die versus this situation, which that's not even remotely what's going on here. And then also, I mean, you could even levy this with the Vietnam stuff. It's like, why exactly were people like doing these events on college campuses? I mean, I guess they're just doing it because they're there, right? It's easy to do the protest on a college campus as opposed to going to some kind of government building, the people that are actually making the policy that you disagree with.
Yeah, they're trying to put pressure on their college campuses because they have some leverage there. So they want their college campuses to divest from Israel.
Right.
I mean, that makes sense. How is divestment from, well, first of all, I don't think it's actually going to happen. I think Sagar actually gives some great commentary on this. And second of all, I mean, even if they did divest, I don't know that it's going to make any tangible change in Gaza. It doesn't change the security situation at all.
Well, that's a very good point. And that's kind of what this debate between Sagar and Krystal is going to be about is it a good idea or a moral idea for kids to break into private property and barricade themselves up in the name of trying to force their college campus to not be invested in Israel, right? So
yeah.
Let's look at this real quick.
Okay, guys, like what's going on here? Hey, we have commencement in 2 weeks. You're all going home. If you don't clear out, you're going to get suspended. It's going to be a problem. And you don't want that. You've paid all this money. We have all this going on. And I think, we're talking about lowering tension. But they threw the cops in. That was a huge mistake. That said, now, though, by boxing people into a corner and also kind of both throwing the cops and then backing down, they've set very unclear expectations. And now we have property damage and a wholesale, occupation of the hall. And unfortunately, I do think it's going to end in some tear gas or something. There's no other, what other options do they have? There's no other way to clear people out. If you're going to barricade yourself inside of the hall, like, what are you going to do? And especially if they start vandalizing, which they already did, to get in there.
Well, you could just, do what students want you to do, which is to divest. No, I mean, that's the other thing is that I know,
but that's not going to happen.
But
the
why not?
Need to understand that.
But why not? Because there was a vote at Columbia Barn.
So is that a reasonable thing to ask for? Why not? Why does the college not give in to children, basically breaking into a building and barricading themselves inside and preventing people from graduating college and using, the commencement, using the area for their commencement address?
Well, sometimes people call this moral hazard, Sitch. Mm-hmm. When you give in to the demands of people acting terribly, you kind of incentivize them to act terribly in the future.
Sure.
So there's that aspect of it. And also the aspect that will divestment actually have any sort of tangible change in the world? I mean, doubtful.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%.
Bernard, and it was overwhelming in favor of divestment.
Yeah, but the students don't control the endowment.
Yeah, but like if you have faculty and students who are overwhelmingly like, just do this thing, then why not just do that thing? And then you won't have your hall occupied and you won't have to send in the cops, etc. But I think bottom line is, like I said,
there's such bad that's like really bad advice. Like, okay, if some group of students, and we don't even know what the majority of the students wants, but if some group of students want something in a school that they're paying to go to, they don't control the school, they're not the administrators of the school, they're students. If some group of young adults or children want something and they try to bully the college into doing it via, breaking the rules, encamping themselves on the lawn, disrupting normal college activities, breaking into buildings, the school should just give in to those demands. Like, that just feels like a terrible idea.
Yeah, just do it. Just do
Okay.
it. Just do
Okay.
it. Sid.
All right.
These students have already been kicked out of school and arrested, so they're not
some
afraid.
of them have. We don't really know. But I also would say this: don't throw your future away for this. I know some of these protesters. Please don't do this. Your parents spent a lot of money on.
I disagree with that.
You want to get your ass expelled for like this? What are you going?
Krystal's like, I disagree with that. Throw your futures away. I can't believe this video. This video is a ghastly.
Yeah.
20 years from now.
These are people who have agency and who feel like they're standing against a genocide. And I'm proud of them. I think it's incredible to watch.
20 years from now, you'll be a footnote to history. You're going to be in some idiot on YouTube giving a monologue.
But who cares?
Maybe talking
you
about
will
you.
know.
You're not going to have a degree.
You will know.
Threw away a bunch of money.
Sitch, making emotional decisions in the moment that have dubious results for your long-term goals. Is that like a good plan, Sitch? What do you think?
I mean, this is really bad advice. Like, this is really, really horrible advice that Krystal is essentially giving to her audience. Is, she's going to go into this whole thing about how, it's good that the kids risk their entire future to be on the right side of history, essentially, argument, which, I mean, we'll get into it a little bit when she continues. Just nothing about her argument is logical or reasonable or even moral, in my opinion. So,
just on the emotional decisions, do you think you make better decisions when you appeal to your internal emotional state, or do you think you make worse decisions?
Generally, you make worse decisions.
Generally, you make horrible decisions.
Yes. Yeah.
So even in matters of love, where the heart takes over, we want what we want. Most people, they set aside those moments, those highs of the highs with love, and they do sort of a rational cost benefit analysis, right? Can I live with this person? Is this the type of person that I can spend the rest of my life with, right?
Right.
The people who don't do that cost benefit analysis, they just rush right in headlong to the relationship. Are those the good relationships that tend to go the distance, Sitch?
Listen, I met this person for one day and I already think this is the one. So let's get married and, we'll just close our eyes and not sign a prenup and see how it goes.
This is horrible advice. This is terrible advice, Krystal. What are you doing? What are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
Telling people to make emotional decisions with their entire scholastic career. Oof. Yep. Oof. When you sent me this video, my jaw was on the floor the whole time I was watching this video.
There are more things to achieve in life than like getting your startup funded or getting hired by Wall Street.
Yeah, but that's not the only thing you do. You can be a teacher. This is about basic.
These are.
Yeah. Isn't it weird that like she conceptualizes going to? This is so weird. When she conceptualizes going to for like a person going to college, it's to get your startup funded or to get a job on Wall Street. Like, I thought the left was generally the pro go to college, get an education so you could be a doctor or a lawyer or a teacher or some kind of or a computer programmer, whatever. Right? This is such a weird turn of events from someone on the left to be like, no, just throw your entire college career away and education away for something that will have absolutely no impact on what you even want and what you're actually advocating for.
Yeah, a lot of people are in college for a lot of different reasons. So you can't really just boil it down to, 100% of them are seeking venture capital money. Come on.
It's just weird that she goes
ridiculous.
Yeah.
young people, but they're also adults. And they're also perfectly capable
I totally
of
agree.
making their own decisions about what's important to them in their lives and the way that they want to live. They're not buying into this crap. This part of actually what's in my monologue. They're not buying into this crap about the only success that matters is success in terms of a capitalist marketplace. They have values. Those values are important to them. They're willing to, I think it's incredibly admirable that they're willing to sacrifice in many instances for people they don't know and will never meet. Like, that's extraordinary. And I think it's brave. I think they're to be commended, not, scolded for making the wrong life decisions.
I'm not going to.
Okay. This is so awful. All right. It's very easy for a person who will not only have no financial or physical repercussions for advocating for a political cause, but will benefit from it, right? Krystal's on a show where she benefits for, speaking her mind about politics and these sorts of positions. It's super weird to me, and even privileged to me, that for her in this position of privilege and entitlement to kind of turn around and advocate for people to essentially cause themselves potentially massive financial harm for a cause which their support won't even affect at all.
Yeah.
It just seems so wrong to me, because what could happen to these kids is, and Sagar, talks about it, these kids are going to be expelled. They could have an entire, 4-year degree essentially wasted. All this money that they spent going to college could be wasted. Who knows if once they get expelled, will they even be able to get into another college, or colleges say, you know what, we're not going to allow anyone that got expelled for storming a building in Colombia to be, part of our college. If they get arrested, they have a record now. If they get arrested more than once, how's that going to affect them going forward? People could have really severe life-altering repercussions to being expelled from college and being arrested completely.
Yeah.
And it's just so flippant for Krystal to be like, well, there's more important things to life than like the capitalistic acclamation of goods. It's like, okay, well, why do you got to make it like a capitalist thing? Maybe people just want to have a job and a career so they can, provide for their family and themselves and do something they actually enjoy. Is that like an evil capitalistic acclamation of goods to want that in life?
Well, they're being caught up in, they're kind of being emotionally manipulated into doing other people's bidding. These people are like protest fodder for the intelligentsia. I feel like Krystal is, she's hitting that note over and over again in this video. It's like, do you really think it's a good idea to throw away your future on this thing that is like, does it really matter in the great scheme of things in your life?
Well,
No,
but that's another thing too. That's kind of like insane about this is, okay, so they're not, to be clear, these people are not protesting to stop the war anyway. Like,
no,
the College of Columbia has no impact on whether Israel continues, killing people in Gaza or not whatsoever. Okay. So you have to make this decision. Number one, is it worth protesting for? You're probably not going to get your demands met. It's highly unlikely that you'll even get your demands met, which is that for Colombia to be divested from every single business that has any association with Israel, because it seems like that's basically impossible. But it seems completely unlikely that those demands will be met whatsoever. So is it worth basically destroying your life or potentially destroying your life over a protest where you're probably not even going to create the change you want? Number one. Number two, even if hypothetically you could get the demands you want passed, okay? So Colombia does divest from Israel. Who cares? That's not going to stop Israel from blowing up and killing innocent people in Gaza whatsoever.
Yeah, it's not going to change Israel's plan one bit.
Yes, it's not like you're like, oh, these kids are, potentially risking their futures in some act that's going to actually stop, Israel from killing innocent people. This has nothing to do with that. This has zero effect on the foreign policy of the United States and of Israel in this regard completely. And to me, it's like totally insane that a person would potentially that you'd advocate for a person to essentially throw away, their life and possibly destroy their life for something that has no meaningful impact on anything.
Yeah, it's crazy. It is crazy, but people are going to do it. People are going to do it, and just ouch. Ouch, when they finally wake up and realize, oh my God, that was a totally emotionally driven decision that destroyed my entire life.
Yes. Yes.
Scold anybody.
You are scolding them.
I'm telling you, I wouldn't do it, and I'm sitting
That's
here as a
fine.
32-year-old.
You're not doing it, and
I'm
you
a
didn't do it, and
32-year-old
that's
man,
fine. But
and I will
they can make
promise
their own
you that
decisions.
10 years ago, nobody remembers a fucking thing that I said, and there's a good reason for
But
that.
you
and
do.
I hope that they don't.
But you do.
No, I certainly do.
You-
But
You can make your own decisions, but I think it's admirable what you're doing. You catch that, Sitch?
Yeah.
Yeah. Are you feeling me there?
I'm feeling you. I'm feeling you.
do.
but I
And
regret a lot of it too.
And they will know when they're old and gray and they look back and everyone else is pretending to have been on the right side, they will know where they were. And they
Oh my God. She almost said the right side of history, Sitch. You've been making
I know.
fun of the right side of history.
I know.
For days now. On the right side. There is no right side to this conflict.
No, it's incredibly silly to think that, like, 50 years from now, everyone's going to be like, oh yes, Israel was the Zionist evil colonizer. Like, that's going to be the fucking way people are going to look at the situation 50 years from now. It's absurd.
I mean, if Krystal's on the right side and she's on the same, does that mean Hamas is on the right side of history? I mean, what the fuck?
Right. And that's another, I mean, we haven't talked about how, like, a lot of the protests, the lines have been so blurred from people just advocating for a ceasefire, people advocating to stop the bombing, to, very pro Hamas support, to people advocating that the state of Israel should no longer be allowed to even exist or should exist, after it's been there for 70 plus years. So, I mean, just again, like, and it just seems so privileged to me. And kind of gross for Krystal, who's in a position where she gets money. She gains money and status for advocating for a political position, to advocate for people to essentially harm their own lives in a very significant way by advocating for the same political position. It just seems gross to me.
Right. Yeah.
They will know what they can tell their kids about what they did.
But that's
in that
not going to
moment.
feed you or your kids. I mean, ask some of these
No, they're not going to have any kids. No one's going to marry them. They're going to be unemployed. Like, what are you talking about? There's going to be no grandkids to tell this story to. This story ends in a tragedy.
Right.
non-war people, how it all worked out for them in 20 years later, so 1988. We elected Reagan. We had Iran-Contra and all that. Like, did it really make a difference? What happened to a lot of those folks? Not much. Petered out. Nixon got elected. Law and order, sky-high murder rates, mostly backfired. Let's be real.
It's such a cynical.
See, but this is, again, like, it's soccer just laying down the hard truth that people don't want to hear. It's like these protests that you're talking about that were fueled by emotion, okay? They weren't fueled by someone being pragmatic, someone being logical, someone thinking, what's, a way to make actual tangible change they want manifest in the world. It was ruled by emotion. They did these protests, and it created all these events that just did the exact opposite of everything they wanted.
Yeah. Yeah, optimism bias is a bitch, man.
Cynical view of the world, though,
But
to
it's
say
true.
like basically nothing matters. No protest matters. Your genuine concern about this. You're protesting of the government. You're disrupting political speeches. Nothing you do matters. So just like go out and get your bag. I think that's a really cynical
Not nothing,
and
but
disturbing view of the world.
Not nothing matters, but a very little does matter.
Listen, here's the bottom line.
And even, I mean, and soccer is much more even cynical than I am about it, because my position would be, obviously it's not nothing matters, protest matters, but you have to actually be protesting for political action in something that would actually enable the change that you want in the world. And this is what actually, makes me so upset when I see idiot protesters or idiot actions from organizations, from countries that do things that enable the exact opposite of what they want. Like Hamas on October 7th, even if you are one of these radical people. Krystal is not one of these people, but even if you're one of these radical people like Second Thought or any of those people that are cheering on Hamas, killing Israelis and don't think that any Israeli is a citizen or civilian or anything like that, like, you're still a complete moron, because everyone knows that attack, that Hamas doing that is only going to cause Israel to like basically kill a lot more Palestinian people. And it's not going to actually enable the positive change in the world you want. And if you're part of it's like a riot. Okay. Riots always backfire. They always do the exact opposite of what you want. They don't enable positive change. When you look at a lot of the riots during the civil rights movements and all the areas where there was massive violence and riots, they essentially all swung to vote for Nixon, in power, which is not what the people rioting or protesting wanted. And it's kind of the same thing, like the BLM stuff is that a lot of those areas, swung to be more red, which is something that Krystal and these people don't want. And you look at and it's why I get so sickened when people basically, run defense for riots. It's like they're all caught up in the emotion. Like, don't you understand, Sitch? Don't you understand why these people are so emotional? All these bad things are happening to them. And I'm like, I don't care why people are emotional. I don't care if someone's emotions are justified. That's a completely irrelevant point. What matters in the real world is what if the actions you're doing will actually create the positive changes in the world you want. And if they don't, then what the fuck are you doing? Okay, you sitting out there just getting your emotions out, if it makes everything worse for everyone, is a huge, horrible, horrible, horrible thing. It's a waste of energy. It's a waste of time. And it's ultimately destructive. And that's what so many of these protests are doing. When people throw paint on classic works of art, when they glue their hands to block traffic to the airport, when kids are breaking into buildings and doing this stuff, this is not gaining any support for any of these movements. It's just making everyone across the country say, I don't like these children. I don't like these protesters. Whatever they're for, I'm against. And that's the reality of it. And if you don't want to accept that, that's you being entirely motivated by your own righteous emotional anger and not actually caring about wanting the positive change in the world enacted.
Yeah. Also, you'll have some story to tell your grandkids. Come on.
Yes. Right.
Wouldn't that story be so much more influential if you actually got tangible change in the world?
Yes. Why? Yes. The finals are fast approaching. The school year is almost over. Okay. All these kids that are, they're all these freedom fighters. They care so much about this issue, right? Why don't they? It's very simple. Okay. As school is about to end, they don't even have to sacrifice their scholastic career, could just simply organize a movement where they all go to Washington and sit in the House of Representatives building, sit in the Senate building, start to do actual protests that would have some kind of tangible impact on the American government to try to enact the change they want in the world. Why are they not doing that? It's because that would require too much energy and effort and motivation for people to get organized to do that. It's much easier for people to play pretend virtue signal protests where they set up a pop tent on campus and they sit around singing Kumbaya around the fire.
No plane tickets, no bus tickets involved in that, Sitch.
Yeah.
Look, it's easy. It's right down the street from my dorm room.
Yep. Maybe you shouldn't throw your life away for that. Just a question. Right.
We know what will happen if these protests don't proceed, if these kids don't risk the things that they're risking that, again, I think they should be absolutely commended for. We know what will happen. Absolutely nothing. We don't know what will happen if they try. And we've seen at least that there has been some pressure placed on the administration. And I think that's important. And we see globally, this is another thing I have in my monologue.
Her voice is kind of trembling, Sitch.
Yeah, she's very emotional about this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's very fascinating.
Well, because this is not, and you honed in on it completely. Krystal is not thinking about this logically at all, nor does she care to. It's all emotion. And I get it. There's lots of horrible shit that Israel has done in Gaza. And she talks about in the beginning, that story of that girl who, was in the car and
she says
family died.
She says she's assassinated, and I shudder. It's not an assassination. She wasn't targeted. She was collateral damage. It's a fucking shitty story, of course. But to make it sound like she was targeted for assassination, come on.
Well, Krystal thinks that she was a target for assassination, right?
Yeah.
But regardless of whether it's targeted or not, whatever, it's just a horrific story, right? So I completely understand and empathize with the horrible situation that's going on right now in Gaza. And I understand why people want that situation to stop. I get it. Okay. But the problem is, and this is such a failing of human nature, is that people, instead of taking that energy and doing the work of figuring out a way to manifest what they want, they just lash out around them. This is what a riot is. It's I have all this energy and emotion for bad things that are bad things I perceive that have happened to me, and instead of moving it in some kind of packaging it in some kind of direction that'll actually make my life better, I'm just going to lash out at everything around me. And that's what these protests are with these kids. These kids are not enacting any positive change. They're just lashing out. And I don't think it's a good idea for children to lash out in a way that's going to essentially screw up the other kids that are going to college as well as screw up their own future.
Yeah, it's terrible.
People in Gaza see them. These Palestinians in Gaza are being starved to death and threatened with bombing, and the entire male population in Rafah now basically threatened with execution and murder. They see these protests and it means something to them. I mean, that alone is, I think, significant and important. And you see the way that international pressure, I mean, you see the way Netanyahu is kind of freaking out about the fact that there's international pressure and these students are part of that larger movement. So yeah, there are no guarantees here. You're right. There was a backlash to the Vietnam War protesters. Huge. And you're right, that could happen again. But we know damn well what happens if these kids do nothing. And that is the status quo perseveres. Palestinians are probably, kicked out of their land altogether, continue to be murdered, continue to be slaughtered. We know that's what happens if they don't protest. They think there's a chance they could change something, and I applaud them for doing it.
I think this is the exact opposite. Okay. As Israel has killed a lot of aid workers, okay, whether you want to believe it was intentional or accidental, that has caused a big uproar around the world. As the number of people die in Gaza, that has caused a lot of uproar around the world, and it has caused a lot of pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu and America and and on Joe Biden and the foreign policy and all these things, involved. These kids protesting on college campus, not only do they have no impact whatsoever on creating additional pressure for Israel, it literally does the opposite. It literally does the opposite. People see these kids protesting on college campuses and say, whatever they're supporting, I'm not going to support. Okay.
Right.
And not just
negative
people.
Impact.
Right. It's going to have a negative impact. There's a high likelihood that people are going to look at this and say, well, I'm going to vote, Republican, or I'm going to vote for whoever is going to be more pro Israel, or whatever. They're not going to support this stuff. And it's not, and even for the people that aren't on the right, like people on MSNBC are calling out these protests. People in the mainstream are calling out these protests. This is not helping the Palestinian cause whatsoever. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if all these protests just get people more on board with either supporting Israel or kind of moving themselves away from even caring about the issue at all.
Yeah, I agree.
May be right. I think they're wrong. I think it's a misreading of history and of power and of how that all works. Now, again, I would take it back. I don't want to scold people. I would only give you some advice that when you're very young, it can be real easy to get caught up in whatever the current thing of the day is. I'm trying to think back from 2012 or whatever, whenever I was in college. DACA, that was a big one. All right, people march for DACA. This was all over. Sorry, look, it ended up working out. Nothing. Like, I'm just asking people to have a little bit of historical literacy and to be mindful that actions are going to have consequences. Now, you're an adult. You do whatever you want to do, and I support your right to do that, and I've spoken here openly. I support people's right to protest and all that. I would just caution folks to not get caught up into thinking, this ain't 1966 in Selma, Alabama and all that. And there's too often, lack of thinking about these consequences. Let's think back to BLM. I mean, people took to the streets. They thought this was going to be a revolution. What's the actual lasting consequence? You almost got Donald Trump reelected. You have a sky-high murder rate and nothing changed in terms of police action. So I hope you felt better, but that's pretty much it. And a bunch of grifters got to buy mansions in Los Angeles. You didn't change anything.
You're just arguing for give up.
No,
that is your view.
Understand politics.
That is what you're arguing.
Yeah.
Give up.
He says it and she doesn't even hear it.
I know.
He says, understand politics.
Yeah.
Understand politics. It's so simple. It's it's the art of what is possible.
Yes.
And
Yes.
you know, blowing all of your energy on the impossible is just a waste of time.
Yes. I
Yeah.
think one of the biggest problems that we face as society right now is the fact that after the housing crash in 2008, America never really did anything about it. The
Yep,
the
I
economic
totally
system
agree.
didn't
Yeah.
change. You know, the people
Wasted
responsible,
opportunity.
right. There was people responsible were not held accountable. It was a massive wasted opportunity. And now it's obviously not just the Occupy Wall Street people's fault for that. Obviously, that wouldn't be fair. But you had this was a big part of it was that the Occupy Wall Street people were all these like dumb far left kids who had no clue about exactly what Sagar said. They have no clue about how to actually engage in the political world or get any change that they want to manifest. And so what they do, they sat around and they protested and they had a list of like 1,000 demands that could never be met and were completely impractical. And so nothing happens, nothing changes. Right after 2008, politicians, especially on the left, were like hungry for some kind of change, and no one could galvanize it in any way that impacted anything.
Yeah. That is the status quo right there. Ineffective protest.
Yeah, I mean, I would even go far as say that these protests, these college kids protests, this is bread and circus for the left.
Oh yeah, definitely. Definitely. They're loving this.
Don't try. Don't try. Don't bother. If you care about something, you know what? Keep your mouth shut, stay home, and go get your bag. That's what you're arguing for. And I think, listen, the reality is we know how hard it is to have our democracy actually reflect what people want and the will of the people. But I don't know why you're even doing what you're doing here and caring about politics if you think that nothing ever matters and nothing ever changes. Obviously, we've had protest movements in our history that have mattered and have changed. We can look back at LGBTQ rights in the very recent past, where there was an organized movement and there was protest. And guess what? Change came and it mattered and it happened. The Black Lives Matter protest situation, I think part of what happened there and led to a backlash that you're right, absolutely nothing changed is number one, the co-optation, as you said, by grifters. Number two, the lack of any sort of like organized specific demands. And number three, the fact that in direct contrast to these protests, you actually had real widespread violence and property destruction and damage. You have not had that here.
No, I totally agree. And I
There's a fourth thing that she missed was that the BLM riots / protests were built on a lie. They were built on the lie that white police officers are disproportionately going around killing unarmed innocent black men. And when you looked at the data, that just wasn't true. It just wasn't true. And that's why, you can't really compare it to something like LGBT rights or the civil rights movement, where those things were based on something that was true, that black people, that gay people didn't have equal rights in America. They were based on something that is true, and the BLM stuff was not.
Yeah, that's a great point, because whatever change they're advocating for isn't even, it's moot if it's not even based on factual reality.
Exactly.
Like you're advocating for a problem that doesn't exist.
commend these people. I said it from the beginning. I'll explain then, why am I sitting here? Because I want to convince people and understand how power really works in this country and the ways in which it can change. So let's think about the civil rights era. There's a great series of books called The Parting of the Waters. It's three series. I highly recommend people read it. A misreading of history is to think that Martin Luther King Jr. in the Selma, Alabama march is the only thing that mattered. And it's totally wrong. The NAACP, working with Lyndon Johnson and with the U.S. Senate over a period of 25 years in the legislative process, using the protest movement to specifically co-opt and hit the powers of center that mattered, actually resulted in the 1964 Civil Rights Act. On top of the assassination of John F. Kennedy, it was the perfect moment for it to actually be able to come through. That's how it worked, right? So it's not just taking to the streets. Now, right. I'm not going to diminish the people who took to the streets,
right?
But they're not actually the ones who really changed anything.
Well,
it was LBJ, and it was the people, Hubert Humphrey, and other
the cocktail.
Yes,
so what? They didn't matter. I mean, come on,
they
that's
mattered a lot. They mattered a lot less than the NAACP and the Lyndon Johnson, Hubert Humphrey, and the leaders.
But you're pretending like what's happening in Columbia is the only thing happening in the entire country.
No, I mean,
again, this movement has already won the argument. This movement has already dramatically changed public opinion, especially in terms of young people.
I don't know how she can say that. I mean, first of all, Sagar's completely correct. It's going through, there's all this like complicated, political planning and organizations actually operating, behind the scenes and working with the government to try to craft legislation that enacts the policies that the protesters would presumably be the one protesting for in the first place, which obviously is all missing here. But I don't know how Krystal can say that they've already won. I mean, the protesters haven't changed anyone's mind. Again, this is a complete misreading of the situation. These protesters have changed no people's minds. The facts or the perception of facts of Israel, killing too many innocent people, or Israel or the Israeli military, killing aid workers, has changed people's minds. These protests have nothing to do with any of that whatsoever.
Yeah. If anything, they've changed people's minds in the opposite direction.
Yes. And also I think most importantly, part of the reason that even the mainstream left has soured on a lot of these protests isn't just the fact that they're inconvenient because they're on college campuses and they're taking over buildings things, is because the messaging has changed. Even Norman Finkelstein, who I despise and I think is radically, on the far left, hates Israel. Even he acknowledges this and is aware of this, that they're not going to make any sort of good movement on the politics of this if the kids' position is no longer ceasefire, but is down with Zionism, is down with the state of Israel, which is what a majority of these protests seem to be manifesting on these college campuses at the moment.
It's like defund the police all over again.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like,
this movement has made it so that for the first time, candidates like Summer Lee can actually be out and out oppositional to, critical of Israel, and AIPAC didn't even try to defeat her because they knew she was too strong, she was going to win. For the first time, there is actual political weight on the side of the Palestinians where it's only been on one side previously. So those are all changes that are being made. And by the way, as I said, this is not the only thing that's happening. You also have organizations that are forming, that have formed, that are designed to put money on the other side of the equation, organize on the other side of the equation. You have unions that have gotten involved who have come out in favor of ceasefires and putting their organizational weight and might behind it. So to pretend like this is the only thing that's happening, and so, so it's not going to matter, to pretend that protests just haven't ever mattered in history, I just think I think it's preposterous. I think it's nihilistic, and I just think it's ahistorical.
I don't think that it doesn't matter. I think that it is.
It is annoying. She keeps strawmanning him. He keeps saying, well, that these other things matter more importantly, or they matter in conjunction with. He's not saying no protests ever matter.
Yeah,
but
it's sad.
Part of a broader whole, and I would urge people to not overestimate what part of one whole is and underestimate I completely agree with you on the union part, on the Congress part, and that, why do we spend so much time here? That shit really does matter. Like, who really votes for X, Y, aid to Ukraine? Why do you think we spend so much time here? Or I care so much about Congress and the way that Ukraine aid matters and explaining all this shit about parliamentary procedure, because that's the stuff that really governs our lives. Like, me taking to the streets, and if I started an anti-Ukraine war protest, which I would love to participate in if anybody ever wants to let me know the next one that is happening.
Oh, but why? It wouldn't matter.
But that's my point. It wouldn't do anything. It actually wouldn't do anything. Now, if I spend some of my time here and I win the argument and I try and work, pressure lawmakers to actually do something, that's going to be a little bit different. And explaining to the people here about how some of that stuff works and to the limited extent that we actually have a check in our huge democratic system, that is a real understanding, I think, of kind of how the power works. Again, when you're 21 years old, you don't have any power regardless. So yeah, this is probably your best bet in terms of participating in the whole. I am only saying you should also think about your future and what it's like in the, and in a way, it's a little bit nihilistic to think that me getting expelled from school over participating or, breaking down a Hamilton Hall window is going to change the world. Like, I'm sorry, the most likely outcome is that you're screwed 10 years from now. Nobody remembers. You don't have a degree. You got expelled, and now you're $150,000 in debt. I worry about those people too. I mean, I'm certainly, how are they going to buy a house or whatever? Actually, the single worst situation you can be in is to have no degree and all of the attendant Ivy League school debt, which no wonder a lot of these people are going to be in. That's just, in a way, that's nihilism as well. Thinking that this is the most important thing that's ever going to happen in your life. The truth is, it's not, almost by a large.
Stand up for the things that you believe in and you're willing to bear a cost and a consequence, I think, is what we call courage and is admirable. And yeah, they know that there is a potential price that they are paying.
So there's two things. First of all, number one, you know, I completely disagree with Krystal on this. She thinks that these kids, these young adults, have some sort of like cognition about what they're doing and what they're risking. And I don't agree with that at all. I don't think any of these people are thinking through very clearly, the ramifications that any of these events could have on their life at all. This is all just, as you said, this is all just emotion and kids being stupid kids, essentially.
Yeah, you'd think the adults would step in and tell it like it is, right? I feel like Sagar is obviously stepping in and telling it like it is.
He's he's trying to. He's trying to.
Krystal's just kind of getting caught up in
the fever,
in the moment.
Yeah,
exactly.
And again, it's easy for her because it's going to have no negative impact on her life whatsoever.
Yeah. So Aaron Bushnell was a guy who lit himself on fire to bring who knows why he lit
he's crazy, obviously, but yes.
Yeah. But there was, he was like a Palestinian.
As to bring attention to the issue. Right.
Right. Okay. As if there wasn't enough attention on the issue already.
I know.
I'm just like, where's the Aaron Bushnell video for, what's Krystal's take on that? Because I mean, we're getting close to the same ballpark here. If you're basically going to throw away your entire academic career for something of dubious value, it's just like, well, I mean, what? Why?
Right.
And then for somebody to come in and say, oh, what you did was amazing, which there were a lot of people on the internet that were like, oh, Aaron Bushnell, oh man, hero. Right?
Yes.
What? Why? Like a guy kills himself for a conflict that he's not even really a part of. It's
and
just
his death
senseless.
Will have no change whatsoever.
Yeah, it's senseless. It's senseless. It's senseless. I mean, it is very nihilistic to think, oh yeah, look, we're sticking it to the man over with Aaron Bushnell's corpse. That's pretty morbid.
Yeah. That's why I said this is bread and circus. What Krystal is cheering on is just bread and circus for the left here at the time. Because again, it's not just that these kids are not making good decisions because they're dumb kids. I mean, we all, I remember what it's like to be that age. I was making stupid decisions. I'm sure you were making stupid decisions at that age.
Yeah, pretty easy to get kids to make dumb decisions. I mean, what? That's easy.
Right. That's like the easiest thing in the world. And yet, and again, these protests have no impact on actually substantially helping the people of Palestine. They have a greater chance of making it actually worse whatsoever. If you actually wanted, to have a good change for your cause, if you're anti-Israel, you're pro-Palestinian or whatever, what's the thing that they always point to? They always blame for everything. They always say, oh, it's all AIPAC's fault, right? It's all, I forget, there's that really large Christian evangelical pro-Israel super PAC too.
There's a bunch of them. Yeah,
there's a bunch of them. And that's what they always point to. Like, so if you really wanted positive change, well, what you need to do is you have to work in the system and you have to have a very powerful lobbying super PAC organization that is anti-Israel, that's pro-Palestinian. And you have to get that going and you have to sort of organize that. That's not sexy. And that's a lot of work. And so people just don't want to do that. They want to play pretend revolutionary on their campus because the truth of the matter is they don't really care so much about this. They just need purpose or meaning in their lives, or they're angry at something in their lives. And so this is kind of, making them not have to deal with themselves. So they instead latch on to some other issue.
Yeah, it's sad. And I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say it anyway, because I do sense some of that revolutionary fervor in Krystal. Right. And Krystal's obviously been in this game for a long time, right? Trying to make positive change in the world and probably not seeing a lot of positive change take place around her.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, this might be touching a nerve for her. She might feel like, look, I wasn't instrumental in making effective change. Maybe these kids, maybe this is it. Maybe this is our civil rights.
No, I'm glad you said that because I didn't really think of it that way, but I think you could be 100% correct. Her voice is like trembling, like she's obviously very invested in this in a way that I don't think a lot of people are, especially political commentators are. Right.
So
yeah.
I have a much more cynical view of this. So.
You do. Right. No, but I think you're right. And it's not just the emotional toll of, innocent people dying in Gaza, but also it could be this reflective, I've been fighting for these issues for most of my life, and they've never really manifested in a way that is the positive change I want. And maybe the next generation of young people can accomplish that, right? Maybe those were simpler times. Maybe you want to go back to those simpler times yourself. Who knows?
Yeah.
They're not stupid. They're quite aware of that. The administration of Colombia has made them quite aware of that. The political elites, the media class have made them quite aware of that. And Bill Ackman threatening to keep them from ever being hired. Like that shit already happened, being doxxed and smeared. Why do you think they all wear masks at the protests? That's why. Okay? They're very well aware of the consequences and they're doing it anyway. And I think they deserve to be commended for that.
See, this really bothered me just because Krystal, you are a political elite. What are you talking about? Like you've been on MSNBC, like people look to you, you're a role model, you have an influential show, like you have how is she not a political elite, Sitch?
She 100% is, yeah. I mean, I don't know, maybe she's viewing like, she's on, YouTube breaking points as opposed to being on MSNBC still or Fox News still or, New York Times or something. So,
Yeah, but a lot of people listen to Krystal, and I mean, she motivates people. So when you say, look, I find this amicable, you're going to reproduce that behavior in more and more people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if it's bad, counterproductive and self-sacrificing behavior, like self-sacrifice for nothing, I mean, that's a waste.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, they move on after this. This was the only part of the clip I want to watch. But
well, it's like she puts a lot of stock in, the manipulations of the political elite. But I do think, to some extent, Krystal, you yourself are in that political elite. So take that to heart.
Hi, you just listened to a Sitch and Adam recorded video. That's right, we're still doing recorded videos. And of course, we're still doing our live streams. Our Sunday live stream begins at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. And our daily live streams start at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. Come check it out. You're gonna love it. Subscribe to this channel right here to watch the live show or watch more of our awesome deep dive videos.